The issue we're presenting is that superheroes are viewed as fascist figures. So by a show of hands, how many of you think that superheroes are fascist? Okay, so before we tell you why they're considered fascist, we're going to start with some history and background information. So what exactly is fascism? Fascism is a form of government that is controlled by one dictator and has the ideology that there is one superior race. In the 19th century, many fascist figures were rising in power in Europe and became very prominent all around the world. Some of the most famous ones are, of course, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who created the fascist party that was later joined by Adolf Hitler. So, how did these figures contribute to the creation of superheroes and the comic books? Economic decay caused by the Great Depression, death of millions of people caused by the attack of Poland, the Holocaust, which took place in Poland, and genocide that was spread all around the world, and by these figures, frightened people and made them turn into some godlike characters who seem to be the only ones to be able to defeat these evil forces, with characteristics such as superhuman strength, X-ray vision, and super speed.
While not as commonly seen in comic books today, the idea of superheroes being fascist has been seen a lot in comic books from the past, such as here, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. In this comic book, it starts off with the mayor, who is seen as indecisive and cowardly. He tries to negotiate with the evil mutant gang leader who tries to take over Gotham. But in the end, this mayor ends up dying to the evil mutant gang leader. This supports fascism in the sense that it shows that a weak government, as shown by the indecisive mayor, isn't going to work and will eventually die off, especially when compared to a fascist ruler that the evil mutant gang leader represents, in the way he rules over his group as a dictator. There are also instances of citizens who depend on absolute governance, such as in one scene where a man pushes another man who's disabled into the subway tracks, thus killing him. This leads the readers to accept Batman's way of dealing with the people of Gotham and his authoritarianism, this way of dealing with it. Because obviously, the man who pushed the disabled man into the subway tracks needs to be restrained and punished, and the disabled man obviously needs to be protected. And this can be done in the way Batman deals with things. Finally, around the end of this comic, Batman ends up defeating the evil gang leader, which again promotes the idea that you need a stronger force in order to keep things in order and to maintain peace. And not only this, Batman also ends up taking control of the evil mutant gang, which doesn't really become evil anymore. And he uses that group in order to restore the city after a power outage, which again promotes the idea that you get a fascist ruler and being able to control your community will get the job done then. Another example of this can be seen in Joe Shuster's and Jerry Siegel's Superman, which first debuted in Action Comics 1 in 1938. This comic promotes fascism and more in the characteristics of Superman, such as him being a part of the super race, which, like Gabriella said before, promotes one characteristic of fascism where a race can be seen as superior than others, and this race being Superman's. Additionally, Superman also uses superpowers in order to fight crime and maintain peace in the city, which again supports the idea that a strong force is necessary in order to be peaceful.
Okay, so Ethan talked about how superheroes promote fascism, and I'm going to be giving some solutions on how they can continue to fight fascism. So Ethan touched on how fascism promotes the idea where you have a dominant race, where one race is above all. And one way to fight that is through diversity, having a diverse set of superheroes and with diverse backgrounds. And Marvel has already taken steps, as we've seen with Miss Marvel, who is a Muslim girl, and Riri Williams, who is black and is in the Iron Man suit. And this way you can kind of go away from your typical white male who's strong and kind of have more diverse superheroes, and that way they fight fascism. Another fascist ideal is that superheroes kind of have this god complex, where they can really do anything and not really be held accountable for their actions. And a way to kind of fight that is just to hold superheroes accountable. We saw this in Captain America: Civil War, where the government was kind of trying to take control of superheroes because of all the destruction they did, and they were kind of holding them accountable. By doing this, you fight that fascist idea and make them look less godlike. And kind of continue on about that godlike, how superheroes have that godlike complex. We see that superheroes are very strong and are able to kind of get over their obstacles because they're just so strong. And it kind of makes it hard for us as the viewers to relate to them. And a way to kind of defeat that is by having less powerful superheroes and more relatable. We see this with Spider-Man, who is a teenage boy who has teenage problems and still fights crime, and it makes it easier for us to relate to that and therefore fights that fascist ideal of a godlike complex. So yeah.
So the nice thing about all our proposed solutions is that they've all had some historical support that they've shown have success. So let's look into this. So you guys all know Dr. Ward. He was an advocate against comics, and he basically, one of his things was saying that comic books were essentially fascist. He caused people to rise up against them, leading to the downfall of the golden age of superheroes, which is when Superman and Batman were created, and also led to an all-time low in comic book sales since the beginning of superhero comics. So comic book companies decided they needed to do something. And all the changes they made aligned with the solutions that we had proposed. They became more responsible, giving ideas of Spider-Man's with great power comes great responsibility. They also expelled authoritarian violence, and they became more moral as superheroes, which also ties back into the responsibility. They became more relatable in the ways that Joanne mentioned with Spider-Man being a teenager, and they also became relatable in that they were obtainable for the audience. They no longer were coming from this huge super race. Most of their powers now derive from science. And also, as Joanne mentioned adequately, they have diversity in like Ms. Marvel and more female superheroes. Another notable thing of this time is they started exploring themes of fascism in a controlled setting. What I mean by this is think of Marvel's Civil War. They have obvious themes of fascism shown throughout their movie. And this is to just propose the idea that at this moment, superheroes aren't truly fascist, but they have the potential to be, so they're becoming more self-aware.
So some limitations to superheroes being fascist. So they still beat their enemies using physical violence, as this appeals to the entertainment factor in their comics. No one really wants to see people just living their everyday lives. They want to see action. There's no real balance of power. The nature of superheroes, they still are superior to humans, and that's what makes humans want to read comics, as they have powers beyond their capability. And the plots of superheroes will always be a bit fascist in that superheroes will always fight villains and they will always win, but they are more relatable and they don't just crush their enemies like they did back then.
Therefore, based on the limitations of the three proposed solutions, we chose diversity, because it doesn't have the same limitations as relatability and accountability in changing the central superhero. Because they still need to be super, and to some degree they need to use violence. That's part of the entertainment appeal. Diversity doesn't have this issue, because superheroes can be anyone. They can be of any race. The only possible limitation with diversity is it isn't the most direct approach in fighting fascism, because the race thing, although we mentioned it, is only a sect of fascism. The main definition is fought through accountability and relatability.